Hi, I'm Kendall at Six Cakes and More, and today we're going to see if we can store our macaron batter in the fridge overnight and use it the next day. So stick around for more. So what I have here is my Italian macaron batter, and this is just my original Italian macaron recipe. You can get the link to it below, as well as a video, start to finish, how to make it. But I made some yesterday, and I didn't want to use all of it, but I also didn't just want to throw it away. So I decided to put it in the fridge and pull it out this morning to see what we could do with it and if it would still work. I did let it come to room temperature, and I just put it in this airtight plastic container, and this is it. I left the the piping tip on it and everything, so we could just go right away. So for the sake of this experiment, I am going to bake it on all three of the different materials that are most commonly used for macarons, which is your silicone baking mat, parchment paper, and Teflon sheets. So I'm going to start with my silicone baking sheet, and I'm not going to pipe a full sheet of these because it is just an experiment and I'm curious. So I'm going to take my batter, and I am going to squeeze a little bit out onto this paper towel first, just to get rid of that part that hasn't really been covered up. And now I'm going to pipe some out. And I am gonna bang this tray down on my table. And that's about all I do, even any other time. But it does look a little more airy than it usually does. But we shall see what happens. Okay, so because of the way this batter looks to me, and it does look so airy and like spongy in a way, I'm going to put these on my stove under my exhaust fan, which just like this, and I'm going to turn my exhaust fan on low, and maybe that will help a little bit in the drying process, because this is just an experiment. It might work, it might not, but we're going to do what we can to try to help it along and help it work out. Okay, so it's been 10 minutes under the exhaust fan on top of my stove, and they are starting to dry, which is good, but I am seeing a lot of these little tiny bubbles that have come up. Some of them have more than others, but they definitely all still have these little tiny bubbles. And what it reminds me of is when I first started making macs, and I was experimenting with what stage was best for my recipe and the meringue, and when I overbeat the meringue, this is how they looked when they were piped out. So knowing that, these still could actually work, but you are going to have those little bubbles on there, so they're not going to be as perfect as, you know, a smooth mac that doesn't have any of these little imperfections. But I'm going to continue to let them dry just so they do form that skin, so it gives them a little bit better of a chance to actually work out. So these have been drying under the exhaust fan on my stovetop for about 20 minutes now, and they are actually starting to dry. I can touch the side of one without it sticking to my finger at all. You can kind of see there how it moves, and they've formed somewhat of a skin. I am going to give them like another 5 minutes just for extra safe measure, and then we'll be putting them into the oven. So we just pulled our first tray out of the oven, and I mean, I'm pleasantly surprised that they did form the feet, but they're not pretty feet. And I can already tell you they're hollow. For me, I know that the hollow is there because you get this speckled area that's darker. That's where it's going to be hollow at. This area over here that is not speckled, that area is full. Like this one is about half full and half hollow. And then I've got one that actually did go ahead and crack on me. But it was just an experiment. So if you absolutely just hate waste so far on silicone, you can bake leftover macaron batter. I am still gonna see, I have the parchment paper ones in the oven right now, and then I will bake the Teflon ones as well because they might turn out different. Your results can change depending on the material you're baking with. So what I'm gonna do is just, this pan is still really hot. I'm just gonna go ahead and pull this off of here and let this, I am gonna go ahead and let these cool all the way before I try to pull them off of there. And as soon as this pan cools off, I'll go ahead and pipe my Teflon. And again, I'm gonna let it sit under my exhaust fan and dry. So I'm gonna wait for these parchment paper ones to come out of the oven and we'll show you those. Okay, so I just pulled the parchment paper ones out and I'm really surprised at these. My paper did flip over because I'm using my fan and I didn't pipe to the edge of my paper, so it flipped over. However, it's still baked up. I did have one crack again, but for me personally, they came out looking a little more like French Macks and how I see French Macks happening. But they developed feet, and so far they're not looking like they're gonna have hollows, but I will let them cool completely and then we'll crack open every one. I do have my Teflon ones still over here drying, so when those dry, I'll bake them and we'll open all of them to see how the insides look. They all cracked. Wah, wah. Aww. But if they're full, then you just dry them longer. That was my bad. So this was the Teflon sheets, and that was a disaster. But I could have let them rest a little bit longer and they probably wouldn't have cracked because these didn't crack. So I'm going to scoot this pan over. While that one's cooling, we're going to go ahead and peel a few of these off the mats and just curiosity's sake see what they're like on the inside. This is the one that looks the least hollow to me because it has more of a full color area than these little speckles. So I'm gonna peel it off, and it came off really well. And the feet are not terrible, but they're definitely not what I would produce if I had not let this batter sit all night in the fridge. So we're gonna open it up, and it's full. There is a slight little hollow right here if you want to really nitpick it, but it's still full mac with a batter that sat all night. So that's pretty cool. I'm gonna do this one right here just because I'm really curious. It stuck a little bit, which this batter was a little more wet than usual, so that doesn't surprise me. That had a tiny bit of hollow. And the shell is very fragile, which I'm not a fan of because I like to decorate my macs. I like to paint on them and take an edible marker and draw on them, so I need my shells to be sturdy. But it's a full macaron, so that's pretty cool. Now we're gonna look at the parchment paper ones, and already you can tell your silicone ones are perfectly round. They don't warp at all. The bottoms are flat. And when you use a fresh batter, they don't stick really at all. So that's a good, perfectly round Mac. Then when you use your parchment paper, they can tend to get a little bit oddly shaped, especially if you're using a fan. You have a problem with the paper flopping around. But we're gonna go ahead and crack one open. But I am gonna show you the difference in the feet. That's stuck a little bit worse. And you see they get these like little ripples on the bottom. I know you're just gonna fill it and close it and nobody's gonna see that, but it bugs me personally. So I'm not really a fan at all of parchment, but we're gonna open this one. These shells are very fragile, but again, shockingly, they are full. I'll just peel another one off of here. And it is full. So the Macs are still full. The batter works as far as if you follow my technique with the stage of the sugar syrup and the meringue. If you follow all of the technique, you can produce full Macs, even with a batter that has sat in your fridge overnight and baked the next day. No, they are not visually appealing, but if you're not for wasting anything, and maybe like your family just likes snacking on shells, these are perfectly fine for that. I've seen people put them over ice cream. I haven't done that yet, but it's popular. So you're still gonna make a full Mac. It's still edible, it's just not quite as pretty as you want it to be. Now these are all cracked and they're still hot, so they're gonna stick a little more. But Teflon is awesome as far as not having anything stick. And they're full. So I would consider the only success with this whole experiment is that they all baked full. So that's pretty cool. But I would suggest sticking to a fresh batter if you want your Macs to look pretty and look presentable. But I don't know, I think that was a pretty cool little experiment, and I'd say it was a success just because they're still full Macs. You can still eat these. I just wouldn't really be showing them off to anybody. That's just me. So the question was, can you let macaron batter sit overnight in the fridge and bake it up the next day? You can. They're not very pretty at all, but they do produce full Macs and they are definitely edible. I just probably would never do that again. If there is something that you guys would like to know, will it work? Comment below and we'll see if we can make it happen.